The hum of Verdi's on a Friday night was a particular kind of music. It wasn't the soft melody a piano might make, but a rich blend of clinking silverware, the low murmur of conversations over white linen, and the gentle clatter of porcelain from the kitchen doors. Soft, golden light pooled from elegant fixtures onto tables where wine glowed like liquid ruby in crystal glasses. The air smelled of garlic, fresh basil, an expensive perfume dot in the middle of this carefully choreographed scene. Elena moved. She was a current of efficiency in the warm, lazy river of the dining room. Her black apron was tied neatly around her waist, a small notepad and pen tucked into its pocket. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, practical way, but a few strands had escaped, framing a face that was watchful and kind, though the skin under her eyes hinted at a tiredness no amount of sleep could quite fix. She carried 3 heavy plates on her arm and 1 in her hand, a skill learned through countless shifts. She didn't look at the plates as she moved. Her eyes were on the space between tables, on the faces of the people she served, anticipating a raised hand or a glance searching for a refill. She delivered the food with a quiet, "Here you are. Enjoy," her voice a soft contrast to the restaurant's buzz, before turning seamlessly to collect empty wine glasses from a nearby table. Her section was full tonight. A young couple on a date, leaning close and speaking in whispers. An older family celebrating a birthday, the teenager scrolling under the table until his mother gave him a look. And then there was Table 7. Table 7 was a storm cloud in the corner. 4 men in tailored suits, their jackets draped over their chairs. They'd been there for 2 hours, their meal long finished, surviving on a steady stream of top-shelf liquor and their own loud opinions. The ringleader was a man with silver at his temples and a watch that probably cost more than Elena's car. He had a loud, confident voice that carried, a voice used to being listened to. His laugh was a short, sharp bark that made the people at the surrounding tables subtly tense their shoulders. Elena had been to their table many times. Another round of scotch, more sparkling water, a forgotten side of olives. Each request was delivered with a snap of the fingers or a careless wave in her direction. She was less a person to them and more a function, a part of the restaurant's machinery. She remained polite, her professional smile fixed in place, her responses limited to certainly and right away. On one trip, as she cleared their dessert plates, the man with the silver hair his friends called him Paul, gestured broadly with his cigar toward the far corner of the room. There, sitting silent and majestic under a small, focused spotlight, was the restaurant's baby grand piano. It was a beautiful instrument, all polished ebony and elegant curves. But in the 3 years Elena had worked there, she'd only ever seen it played a handful of times, usually by a hired musician for special events. "Look at that," Paul said, his voice easily reaching Elena as she stacked plates. "A beautiful piece of craftsmanship, a Steinway. And what's it doing? Gathering dust. It's a metaphor, is what it is. A symbol of the cultural disappointment in this whole town. All show, no substance. It takes a certain pedigree, a refined soul, to draw music from something like that. Not just anyone who can carry a plate." One of his companions chuckled, swirling his drink. "Oh, come on, Paul. Maybe the busboy is a secret virtuoso." Another round of laughter, louder this time. Elena felt the heat rise up her neck, a prickling feeling that crept to her cheeks. She kept her eyes on the plates, her hands steady. She took a slow, quiet breath, the one she always took when the long hours and the thoughtless comments threatened to wear her down. She finished clearing, balanced the stack carefully, and turned to the table. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else this evening?" she asked, her voice miraculously even, devoid of the tremor she felt inside. Paul didn't even look at her. He was already leaning back into his story about a recent business deal. He just flapped a hand in her direction, a dismissive gesture that said she was dismissed. Conversation over. Function complete. Elena walked back to the kitchen, the weight of the dishes in her hands, the weight of his words in her chest. In the bright, chaotic sanctuary of the kitchen, the head chef, a burly man named Marco, saw her face. "Table 7 again?" He grunted, shaking his head as he tossed pasta in a pan. "Loudmouth? Thinks his money makes him interesting. Just noise, Elena. Don't let it get to you." She gave Marco a small, grateful smile and started loading the dishes into the industrial washer. The steam fogged up her glasses for a second. He was right, of course. It was just noise. But sometimes noise had sharp edges. It could cut through the armor you built up, day after day, shift after shift. Later, as she refilled water glasses at the birthday family's table, the teenager finally looked up from his phone. "That guy's a jerk," he muttered, nodding almost imperceptibly toward table 7. His mother shushed him, embarrassed, but gave Elena an apologetic look. Elena just smiled, a real one this time. "It's okay," she said softly. "Enjoy your cake." The night wore on. Table 7 showed no signs of leaving. Their conversation got louder, their jokes broader. Paul's voice dominated. He was talking now about art, about how true talent was a rare commodity, something that couldn't be faked or learned by just anyone. Helena stood by the service station, polishing wine glasses until they shone. Her gaze drifted, as it often did, to the piano in the corner. The spotlight made its surface gleam like still black water. For a moment, she wasn't in the restaurant. The clatter and chatter faded into a distant hum. In her mind, she saw different hands on those keys. Younger hands, moving with a fearless, fluid grace. She felt the ghost of a feeling, a deep, resonant vibration in her chest, the kind that came not from hearing music, but from being inside of it, from making it happen. It was a feeling tied to a different life, a different person she used to be. It was a sweet and aching memory, one she usually kept locked in a quiet room in her heart. A sharp burst of laughter from table 7 snapped her back. Paul was holding forth again. "I'm serious. It's a tragedy. That instrument is practically weeping from neglect." Elena looked down at the glass in her hand. She saw her reflection, distorted and stretched. The tired waitress. The efficient, invisible function. She took another deep breath, a kind that filled her lungs and settled her nerves. She placed the perfectly polished glass down on the shelf with a soft, final click. The manager, a nervous man in a too-tight suit, was hovering near the kitchen door, casting worried glances at table 7. They'd closed out their bill an hour ago. They were just occupying space, and their disruption was starting to affect the other guests. But they were also big spenders, and he was afraid to ask them to leave. Helena watched this little drama for another minute. She watched Paul hold court. She watched the other diners try to ignore him. She felt the familiar, weary resistance in her bones. The choice to stay quiet, to endure, to let the noise wash over her and fade away. It was the safe choice. The easy one, but something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the teenager's quiet solidarity. Maybe it was the way the spotlight caught the curve of the piano lid like an invitation. Or maybe she was just finally, deeply tired of the sharp edges of his noise. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the service station counter. Marco, from his pass-through window, raised a questioning eyebrow. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then she didn't walk toward table 7. She walked around the perimeter of the dining room, her steps quiet on the plush carpet. She walked directly toward the silent, gleaming piano. The walk to the piano felt longer than it was. With every step, the noisy din of the restaurant seemed to pull back, like a wave going out to sea. All Elena could hear was the quick, heavy thump of her own heart in her ears. The plush carpet under her shoes felt suddenly unstable, like she was walking on a dock, swaying over deep water. She saw faces turn as she passed. The birthday family paused, forks hovering. The young couple on their date stopped whispering and watched, curious. From the corner of her eye, she saw the manager stiffen, his mouth opening in a little O of panic. He took half a step forward, one hand raised as if to stop her, but then he seemed to freeze, unsure what was happening. Elena didn't look at table 7. She kept her eyes on the piano. It grew larger, more real with each step. The polished black wood reflected the soft spotlight and the blurred shapes of the room. She reached it, and for a moment just stood beside it. Her hand, the one that had carried 100 trays and wiped 1,000 tables, reached out and touched the smooth, cool lid. It felt familiar. It felt like coming home to a room she hadn't entered in years. Then she sat down. The stool was exactly the right height. It was as if it had been waiting for her. She adjusted it a tiny bit out of pure habit, a muscle memory her body hadn't forgotten. The movement was smooth, practiced. She opened the keyboard cover, and the ivory keys lay before her like a row of silent, waiting teeth. The restaurant was now utterly quiet. The only sound was the distant clang from the kitchen, which then abruptly stopped, as if someone had closed a door. Every eye in the place was fixed on the waitress at the piano at table 7. The man with the silver hair Paul had finally stopped talking. His smirk was still there, but it had hardened, turned confused. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, waiting for the joke to reveal itself. One of his friends let out a low, disbelieving chuckle that died quickly in the thick silence. Elena placed her hands on the keys. They were cool and solid. She closed her eyes. She wasn't in the restaurant anymore. She was in a small, sunlit practice room a lifetime ago. She was 15, her hands strong and sure, with no ache in the wrists, no lingering stiffness in the fingers. The fear and the noise faded away, replaced by a different kind of pressure, one she understood. The pressure to be perfect, to pour everything you are into the next 90 seconds. She opened her eyes. She looked out, not at any one person, but at the room. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear. It didn't carry the soft, deferential tone she used for taking orders. It was steady and calm, cutting through the quiet. "A request," she said, "for the room, to close your evening." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. They were all too surprised. Then, from the birthday table, the teenager, emboldened by the strange tension, called out, "Play something." Epic. A few people smiled nervously. An older woman near the front whispered, "Something classic, dear." "Something beautiful." Elena gave a single, small nod. She knew what to play. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was the piece that had always lived in her hands when words failed. She lowered her gaze to the keys, her posture shifting. Her shoulders relaxed down, her back straightened. The waitress was gone. In her place sat a musician. The first notes were not loud. They were slow, deep, questioning. A simple, haunting melody in the bass, a G minor chord that hung in the air like a sad, unspoken truth. It was the opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. It sounded like a story beginning, a memory unfolding. Paul, at his table, felt his eyebrows go up. This wasn't chopsticks. This wasn't some simple tune. This was serious. The smirk vanished completely. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The music began to build. Elena's left hand established a rolling, wave-like rhythm, deep and powerful. Her right hand entered with a singing, lyrical line, that was incredibly delicate, full of a tenderness that made the breath catch in your throat. The contrast was breathtaking. It was strength and fragility, all at once. Then the storm began. The gentle melody erupted. The music became turbulent, a whirlwind of notes that raced up and down the keyboard. Her hands were a blur, yet every note was crisp, clear, and full of fierce emotion. It wasn't just technical skill, though the skill was blinding. It was the feeling she poured into it. It sounded like anger, like longing, like a great, powerful sadness being unleashed after years of silence. In the kitchen, Marco had come to the swinging door and pushed it open a crack. He stood there, his apron stained with sauce, his tough cook's face soft with wonder. The dishwasher stopped their spraying and scraping. They all listened. The young couple on their date reached for each other's hands without looking, their fingers intertwining tightly. The birthday family sat completely still, the forgotten cake melting in the center of the table. Elena was somewhere else. The music swept her away. Her body moved with it, leaning into the crashing chords, drawing back for the soft, whispering passages. She wasn't thinking about her hands, about the technique. She was feeling it, all of it. The years of relentless practice, the dizzying heights of success as a young girl, the crushing weight of expectation, the sharp, sudden pain of loss, and the long, quiet ache of letting a dream go. It all poured out through her fingers. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was her voice. The piece climbed to its famous dizzying climax, a cascade of notes that seemed impossible for two hands to play. It was furious, passionate, and heartbreaking all at once. And then it fell away. The music returned to a ghost of the original theme, now shattered, grieving. The final notes were two stark, quiet chords. They echoed in the perfect, stunned silence of the restaurant. She held her hands over the keys for a moment after the sound faded, as if saying goodbye. Then she slowly lowered them into her lap. She was back. The noise of the world rushed in, but it wasn't the same noise. It was the sound of a room holding its breath. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite, brief clapping. It was a sudden, explosive wave of sound. People pushed back their chairs and stood up. The birthday family was cheering. The teenager was whistling. The older woman had tears in her eyes. The staff at the service station were clapping, their faces lit up with shock and pride. Elena stood up. She felt shaky, like she'd just run a long, hard race. She faced the room and gave a humble, almost shy nod, nothing like a performer's bow. Her cheeks were flushed. She avoided looking directly at table 7 and began to walk, a little unsteadily, back toward the sanctuary of the kitchen. She didn't get far. Paul was standing in her path. He had gotten up from his table. His face was completely transformed. All the arrogance, the loud confidence, was gone. He looked pale, and his eyes were wide with an emotion he couldn't quite name, a mix of awe, shame, and desperate curiosity. The applause around them gradually died down, people sensing a new scene unfolding. They watched, fascinated. He blocked her way, not aggressively, but urgently. "Wait," he said. His voice was different, quieter, softer. "Please, wait." Elena stopped. She looked at him, her own expression calm, but guarded. She said nothing. He stumbled over his words, a man who was never at a loss for words. That was, I've heard that piece before. At a concert. A real concert. He shook his head, trying to make the pieces fit. Where did you? How can you? He gestured helplessly at the piano, then back at her. How did you learn to play like that? The whole restaurant was listening now. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone wanted to know the answer. The waitress who carried their plates and filled their water glasses had just played a masterpiece. Who was she? Elena looked at the man's confused face. She saw that his taunts hadn't been personal. They came from a place of such deep, unthinking ignorance that he couldn't even imagine her world. The anger she had poured into the music had drained away, leaving her tired, but clear. She didn't speak to the room. She spoke just to him, her voice so low that the others had to strain to hear. But in the silence, every word carried. "I started when I was 4, she said, her tone matter of fact, not boasting. "I went to a special school for music. By the time I was 12, I was playing with orchestras. They called me a prodigy." She paused, looking down at her hands. She flexed the fingers of her right hand slightly. "Then, when I was 17, I developed a problem. A nerve thing. In my hands. It wasn't a major injury, but it was enough. The notes wouldn't come cleanly anymore. Not always. Not when it mattered most. The consistency was gone." She looked back up at him. "You can't be almost perfect in that world. You have to be perfect. Every single time." So that world ended. She said it simply, without self-pity. It was just a fact, like stating the time. Paul stared at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. He thought of all the times he'd snapped his fingers at them. A hot wave of shame washed over him, so strong it almost made him dizzy. "But," he stammered, "you just played." It was flawless. A faint, sad smile touched Elena's lips. "That's one piece. I know it in my sleep. My hands remember. But to do that, night after night, under pressure, with new music, I couldn't build a life on a memory." She glanced around the restaurant. "So, I built a different one. I teach kids now, beginners, and I work here. The piano? It's for me now, not for them." She nodded once, a signal that the conversation was over, and stepped around him. This time, he didn't try to. The walk back to the kitchen felt like moving through a dream. The air was thick with the residue of her music and the stares of the people. Elena kept her eyes down, focusing on the pattern in the carpet, the scuff marks near the service station. The sound of the applause still rang in her ears, but it felt distant, meant for someone else. She felt a familiar, hollow feeling in her chest, the one that always followed a performance, mixed now with a deep, trembling exhaustion. She pushed through the swinging door into the bright, chaotic light and noise of the kitchen. It was a shock to the system, like diving into cold water. The clatter of pans, the hiss of the grill, the shouted orders, it all rushed back in. For a second, everyone stopped. The line cooks, the dishwashers, they all looked at her. Then Marco, the head chef, let out a low whistle that cut through the steam. He started clapping, a slow, solid, respectful sound. One by one, the others joined in, banging spoons on stainless steel counters, grinning at her. It was rough and loud and real. Elena felt her face grow warm again. She gave them a small, shaky smile and a wave that said, "Enough, please." She needed to move, to do something normal. She grabbed her apron from the counter where she'd left it and tied it back on with practiced hands. The familiar weight of it was an anchor. "What was that, huh?" Marco said, walking over, wiping his hands on a towel. "All this time, you're a secret rock star." "Classical," she corrected softly, but she couldn't help a real smile this time. "Just a long time ago. Well, whatever it was, you shut that blowhard up, but good," Marco chuckled. His face, priceless. "Now get back out there. The table by the window needs their check." And just like that, she was back. The spell was broken. She was Elena, the waitress again. She picked up the check presenter and a pot of coffee and pushed the door back out into the dining room. The room had returned to its normal hum, But the energy was different. People were leaning toward each other, talking in excited whispers, glancing her way as she passed. She kept her professional mask firmly in place. She delivered the check, refilled coffees, asked about desserts. Her hands were steady. Table 7 was still there, a silent island in the room. The other 3 men were talking in low, serious tones, but the man with the silver hair, Paul, was just sitting. He was staring into the dregs of his drink, not touching it. He looked like a man who had just been told all the maps he owned were wrong. Elena avoided the table. She busied herself with her other tasks, giving them space, giving herself space. She could feel his gaze following her sometimes, a heavy, confused weight. Finally, the table began to stir. The friends stood up, putting on their suit jackets, clapping each other on the back in a way that seemed forced. They were ready to leave the uncomfortable atmosphere they'd helped create. Paul stood up last, moving slowly. He pulled a sleek, black credit card holder from his inside pocket and placed it carefully on the table. Elena saw it from across the room. It was her job. She took a slow breath and walked over. She didn't meet his eyes. She picked up the holder and the check. "I'll be right back with this," she said, her voice perfectly neutral, the same as it had been all night. At the payment terminal, she processed the bill. The total was enormous. She printed the receipt, slipped it into the leather holder, and walked back. She placed it on the table in front of him. "Thank you very much. Have a good night." She turned to go. She was done. This chapter was closed. Wait. The word was quiet, but it stopped her. She turned back. He was still standing there, holding the leather folder, not looking at it. His friends were already making their way to the door, glancing back impatiently. He seemed to struggle for a moment. He looked older now under the soft light, the confident lines of his face softened by something like regret. "What you said about teaching," he began, his voice rough. "Where do you teach?" Elena was cautious. "Just privately. From my apartment. A few neighborhood kids." He nodded, as if this was vital information. He reached into his jacket again, not for the credit card holder, but for an interior pocket. He pulled out a simple, thick white business card. Then he took a pen from the table. He turned the card over and wrote on the back, his handwriting quick and decisive. He held it out to her. Not with a flourish, not with any of his earlier theatrics. Just a simple offered gesture. Elena looked at the card in his hand, then up at his face. She didn't take it. It's not a job offer," he said quickly, understanding her hesitation. "I'm not. I don't do that." He seemed embarrassed by the assumption. "I know talent. I know real substance. When I see it, when I hear it." He swallowed, the words clearly difficult for him. "I was wrong earlier. About the piano. About a lot of things." He pushed the card slightly toward her. "The name on the front is mine. The name on the back is the director of the City Community Arts Foundation. They run music and art programs for schools that can't afford them. They've been looking for a new program coordinator for months. Someone who gets it, who isn't just an administrator." He paused. "Someone who understands that art isn't just for stages. It's for kids who've never held an instrument. For people who need a voice." He finally met her eyes. "You should call her. Tell her I told you to call. She'd take the meeting. Tell her your story. Tell her what you just told me." Elena looked at the card. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like a door, cracked open to a room she hadn't let herself imagine. Not a return to the concert stage, but a path forward that used all of her, the prodigy, the teacher, the waitress who knew the value of hard work. Slowly, she reached out and took it. The cardstock was thick and smooth under her fingers. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. He just nodded. A jerky movement. He looked relieved and also deeply uncomfortable. There was no grand apology, no dramatic speech. Just this small, concrete action. It felt more real than any words could have. He turned and walked away, joining his friends at the door. He didn't look back. Elena stood there for a moment, holding the card. She looked down at the writing on the back. A woman's name. A phone number. The title, Executive Director. Marco came up beside her, holding a tub of dirty dishes. "He tip okay on that monster bill?" He grunted. Elena glanced at the receipt, still on the table. The tip was more than generous, a percentage so large it was almost silly. But she knew it wasn't the real tip. The real tip was in her hand. "Yeah," she said softly, pocketing the card. He did. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She finished her side work, rolling silverware into napkins, wiping down her stations. The other waitstaff whispered and shot her admiring looks, but she just smiled and kept working. She needed the normalcy of it. When she finally clocked out, the night air outside was cool and quiet. The city sounds were muted. She walked to the bus stop, her bag over her shoulder. She felt the stiff corner of the business card in her apron pocket, which she'd folded and tucked in with her notepad dot sitting on the bench under the fluorescent glow of the bus shelter. She took it out. She looked at the printed name on the front. Just a name and a title at a company she'd heard of. Powerful, but meaningless to her. Then she flipped it over. The handwritten name on the back seemed to pulse with possibility. She thought about what he'd said. A program coordinator. Not playing, but building. Not performing for critics, but creating chances. Using her knowledge, her painful, hard-won understanding of music, to plant seeds in places where no one expected anything to grow. The bus arrived with a sigh of air brakes. The doors hissed open. Elena stood up, the card held tightly in her hand. She climbed the steps, paid her fare, and found a seat by the window dot as the bus pulled away, moving through the canyon of lit-up buildings. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass. She saw the tired waitress. But for the first time in a long time, she also saw the ghost of the girl at the piano, not as a lost memory, but as a part of who she still was. The music wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for a new shape. She leaned her head against the cool glass and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to think. The rumble of the bus was a new kind of hum. She didn't know what would happen when she made the call. Maybe nothing. But the door was open, and for now, that was enough. It was more than she'd had when the night began. She had played for a room full of strangers, and in doing so, had finally been seen. And sometimes, being seen is the first note of a brand new song. The business card lived on her small kitchen table for a week. It sat next to a bowl of fruit that was slowly going soft and a pile of unopened mail. Every time Elena walked past it, she felt a little jolt, like a soft electric buzz. It was a quiet, persistent question mark in her tiny apartment. She didn't call right away. Part of it was the practical, exhausting rhythm of her life. Waitressing shifts ran late, and she had her handful of piano students to teach in the afternoons. Calling during business hours felt like a logistical puzzle. But the bigger reason was a deep, familiar fear that sat in her stomach like a stone. Making that call meant stepping back into a world that had broken her heart. It meant talking about music not as a private comfort or a simple way to make a few extra dollars from beginners, but as her life's work. It meant being judged again, not on how fast she could clear a table, but on the very thing that had once defined her. The thought made her hands feel clumsy. Her students, thankfully, were a distraction. There was a serious 8-year-old boy who practiced his scales with a fierce frown. A shy teenage girl who played pop songs by ear, her face lighting up when she got a chord progression right. Teaching them was a pure, simple joy. It held none of the terrifying pressure of her own past. In their small victories, she found a quiet happiness. Finally, on a slow Tuesday morning, with sunlight streaming through her window and no shift until the evening, she knew she was out of excuses. The card was practically staring at her. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she picked up her phone. Her finger hovered over the numbers scrawled on the back. What would she even say? "Hello. A rude rich man at the restaurant where I work told me to call you." It sounded absurd. She took a deep breath and dialed. Each ring was a lifetime. City Community Arts Foundation. This is Michelle. A warm professional voice answered. Elena's mouth went dry. "Hello, my name is Elena. I was given your number. I was told to ask for you regarding the program coordinator position." She cringed at how uncertain she sounded. There was a brief pause on the line. "Oh, yes, of course. Paul mentioned you might be calling. He was quite insistent I speak with you." Michelle's voice was curious, friendly. "He said you had a remarkable story. Do you have some time now to talk?" They talked for 20 minutes. It wasn't an interview, not really. Michelle asked about her background. Elena kept it brief at first. "I studied music classically from a very young age. I don't perform anymore, but I teach privately." She braced herself for the inevitable, probing question about why she stopped. But Michelle didn't ask. Instead, she asked different questions. "What do you find most rewarding about teaching beginners? If you were trying to convince a school with no budget why music matters, what would you say? Imagine a room of 10-year-olds who have never seen a real instrument before. What's the first thing you do?" These questions didn't scare Elena. They sparked something in her. She found herself talking easily, her voice growing stronger. She talked about the look on a child's face when they first make a melody, about music as a language for feelings kids don't have words for yet, about starting with rhythm and curiosity, not sheet music and pressure. "You're speaking our language exactly," Michelle said, and Elena could hear the smile in her voice. "Look, the formal panel interview is next Thursday. There are 2 other candidates with more direct nonprofit experience. But I have to be honest, Paul's recommendation carries weight, and more importantly, what you're saying carries more weight. Can you come in?" The following days were a strange mix of anxiety and a simmering excitement she hadn't felt in years. She went to her waitressing shifts at Verdi's. The manager had heard about the piano incident and now looked at her with a kind of nervous respect. A few regular customers who had been there that night asked her if she'd play again sometime. She just smiled and said, "We'll see." The night before the interview, she laid out her clothes, the one professional blazer she owned, a simple pair of black pants. It felt like playing dress up. She looked at her hands, tracing the faint lines on her palms. These hands had pulled espresso shots, carried heavy trays, and played Chopin. Tomorrow, they would shake hands and maybe, just maybe, hold a new future. The foundation's offices were in a bright, modern building downtown, a world away from the warm, carpeted hush of Verdi's. Sitting in the sleek waiting area, Elena felt the old, familiar pang of not belonging. The other candidates looked polished and confident, chatting easily with the receptionist. Her interview was with a panel of 3. Michelle, a friendly woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, a stern-looking older man who was the treasurer, and a younger woman who ran the volunteer programs. They asked about her resume, about the gap after her music studies. Elena took a quiet breath. She decided to tell the truth. Not the whole, painful story, but the heart of it. "I had to stop performing professionally due to a physical issue with my hands," she said, her voice clear and even. It was not a dramatic injury, but it was enough to make that particular path impossible. For a long time, I thought that meant music was over for me. But I discovered it wasn't. It just changed shape. Teaching showed me that passing on the love of music, especially to those who might not otherwise get a chance, is its own kind of art. It's building instead of performing. I understand what it's like to have music be everything, and I also understand what it's like to have to rebuild a life around it in a different way. I think that helps me understand both the kids we'd serve and the practical reality of making a program work. The room was quiet. The stern treasurer was nodding slowly. Michelle was smiling. Then the younger woman on the panel leaned forward. Paul told us you currently work as a waitress at Verdi's. He mentioned you. Demonstrated your skills there in a rather unusual way. Her eyes were twinkling. How do you think the skills from that job translate to this one? Elena almost laughed. It was the last question she expected. But an answer came to her immediately, straight from her bones. At Verdi's, you have to read a room instantly. You have to know who needs space and who needs attention. You have to manage 10 different tasks at once, all while staying calm and making people feel welcome. You deal with all kinds of personalities, sometimes difficult ones, and you have to find a way to make it work. And most of all, she said, thinking of the countless glasses of water she'd poured, the extra bread she'd brought for a tired-looking customer, it's about service. It's about providing an experience, a moment of care, even if it's small. Isn't that what this is? Providing a moment of care, a moment of possibility for a child? It's just a different kind of table. When she finished, she saw Michelle and the younger woman exchange a look. It wasn't a bad look. A week later, the call came. Elena was wiping down her own kitchen counter, still in her waitressing clothes from a lunch shift. Elena, it's Michelle. We'd like to offer you the position. The words washed over her, so huge she couldn't process them at first. Michelle talked about salary, benefits, start dates. Elena heard it as if from underwater. She managed to say yes and thank you several times before hanging up. She stood in the middle of her quiet apartment, the phone still in her hand. She didn't jump or shout. A deep, warm calm spread through her, from her chest all the way out to her fingertips. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock she thought was rusted shut. She had to tell someone. Without thinking, she picked up the card from the table, the one with the silver-haired man's name on the front. She didn't call the number. That wasn't the relationship. But she felt a powerful need to acknowledge it, to close the circle. 2 days later, she was back at Verdi's for her evening shift. She was working her last 2 weeks. As she refilled salt shakers, she saw him, Paul. He was at a small table by himself, not with his usual crowd. He was reading a menu, but he looked up as she passed. Their eyes met. He gave a small, tentative nod. She walked over. I got the job, she said simply. I start next month. A genuine, relieved smile broke across his face. It transformed him. He looked lighter. I heard, he said. Michelle called me. She's thrilled. They all are. He paused, seeming to search for words. I'm glad something good came out of my being an idiot. Elena smiled back, a real, easy smile. Me too. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he just nodded again. Well, good luck with it. Thank you, she said. And she meant it for everything for the job, for the shame that led to the chance, for the quiet apology in his eyes. She went back to her work, moving between the tables. The grand piano still sat in the corner, silent. She looked at it as she passed, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel a pang of loss. It was just a beautiful instrument. Her music wasn't trapped inside it anymore. It was inside her, and now it had a new place to go. She picked up an order for table 4, her steps steady, her future waiting. The first day felt like wearing someone else's shoes. The shoes were nice, comfortable even, but every step carried a whisper of this, isn't you yet? Elena's new office was a small, sunlit room with a view of a brick wall, but it was her sunlit room. There was a desk, a computer that whirred quietly, and a stack of paperwork a mile high. Instead of orders for pasta and wine, she had budgets, school calendars, and inventory lists for ukuleles and hand drums. Michelle popped her head in around mid-morning. Surviving the paperwork avalanche? Elena looked up from a spreadsheet, her head buzzing with numbers. I think so. It's just very different. It is, Michelle agreed, leaning against the doorframe. But the numbers only matter because of what's in that folder. She pointed to a thick, colorful file labeled Partner Schools Year 1. That's the real work. Dive in when you're ready. After lunch, Elena opened the file. Inside were profiles of 4 elementary schools in neighborhoods the city's arts funding had mostly passed by. There were pictures of cheerful, run-down buildings, of classrooms with flickering fluorescent lights. And there were wish lists from teachers. Simple, heartbreaking wishes. Asterisk, something for the kids to make rhythm with. Instruments, any instruments. A way for them to express what they can't say. Asterisk, she wasn't Elena the prodigy here. She wasn't even Elena the waitress. She was a bridge. The thought settled her nerves. Her first school visit was to Fairview Elementary, a low, beige building next to a roaring highway. The noise was constant, a dull, grinding roar. The principal, a tired but kind woman with a firm handshake, led her to a 4th-grade classroom. 30 pairs of eyes, curious and wary, watched her walk in. She carried a box. "Hello, everyone," she said, setting the box down. Her voice didn't carry the quiet softness of the restaurant. It was clear and calm, meant to be heard over the distant traffic. "My name is Elena. I work with music. And I heard you might like to make some with me." She didn't talk about notes or scales. She opened the box and pulled out a collection of simple percussion instruments. Tambourines, maracas, woodblocks, a small gathering drum. Their eyes widened. "First," she said, clapping her hands once in a steady beat, "we're just going to match the noise. Follow me." She clapped again. A few kids tentatively clapped. She did a rhythm, slow and easy. Asterisk, clap, clap, clap. Clap. Asterisk, slowly, unevenly, the class joined in. Soon, the room was filled with the sound of 30 pairs of hands talking back to her. A boy in the back grinned, hitting the rhythm perfectly. Then she passed out the instruments. The room erupted in a chaotic cacophony of shakes and bangs. She let it go for a minute, letting them get the noise out of their systems. Then she raised her hands. To her surprise, most of them stopped, watching. "Okay. Now let's be a storm." She pointed to the maracas. "You are the rain starting." A gentle shake began. She pointed to the tambourines. "You are the wind picking up." A swishing, jingling layer added. She pointed to the drum. "And you are the thunder." A deep, proud boom echoed. They played their storm, building it and letting it fade. For 3 minutes, the sound of the highway outside was completely forgotten, replaced by the sound of their own creation. When they finished, the room was breathless and grinning. The teacher had tears in her eyes. This was the work. It was messy, loud, and utterly perfect. Weeks turned into months. Elena's life found a new rhythm. Mornings were for emails and planning. Afternoons were for school visits, for kneeling on linoleum floors surrounded by children. Evenings were sometimes still for a few private students. But now the teaching felt connected to a bigger purpose. One rainy Thursday, she was in her office, finalizing an order for a set of durable beginner keyboards. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Asterisk. Saw the Foundation's newsletter. The photo of the kids with the drums. That's the good stuff. P. Paul. She hadn't heard from him since that day in the restaurant. She looked at the newsletter on her screen. There she was, in the middle of a circle of kids, all of them laughing. She smiled and typed back. Asterisk, it is. Thank you again for the bridge. A moment later, a reply. You're the one walking across it. Just glad I didn't burn it down first. Asterisk, she put the phone down, a quiet warmth in her chest. Some stories don't end with friendship. They just end with understanding. That was enough. The Foundation's annual fundraiser was a gala event at a fancy hotel. It was a world of cocktail dresses and auction paddles, a world that felt more like Verdi's than her classrooms did. Elena wore a simple dark dress. She was there to work, to mingle, and tell donors about the program's during the silent auction. She found herself standing next to the grand piano on the stage. It was a beautiful instrument, even bigger than the one at Verdi's. She ran a hand along its smooth side. Thinking of giving us another performance? She turned. It was Michelle, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. She offered one to Elena. Elena laughed, taking the glass. I don't think so. That's not my role here anymore. I know, Michelle said, sipping her water. But it's still a part of you. It's okay to let different parts live together. Later in the evening, as the live auction was winding down, the professional pianist who had been providing background music took a break. The event host, a local news personality, took the microphone. Before we announce our final totals, we have a very special, unplanned opportunity. We've just been told that one of our newest team members, the brilliant force behind our school programs, also happens to have rather magical hands. Elena, would you honor us? Maybe something to celebrate? A spotlight, terrifyingly bright, found her in the crowd. All the wealthy, well-dressed faces turned toward her. She felt a flush of panic, the old fear rising like cold water. This was the pressure. This was the judging gaze. But then she looked at Michelle, who gave her an encouraging nod. She looked at the table where the stern treasurer was sitting, and he was actually smiling. She thought of the storm she'd conducted in the 4th grade classroom, of the boy who found the thunder in his drum dot. This wasn't for a panel of judges. This was for the kids whose faces were in the brochures on every table. This was for the music itself. She walked to the piano, the sound of her heels clicking in the hushed room. She sat. The silence was immense. She placed her hands on the keys, not the hands of a prodigy, but the hands of a teacher, a coordinator, a waitress, a woman who had rebuilt her life note by note. She didn't play Chopin. She played something simpler, more hopeful. It was a gentle, flowing piece by Debussy, Clair de Lune. It was music that sounded like moonlight on water, quiet and beautiful, and full of peace. She played it not with fiery passion, but with deep tenderness. It was a lullaby for the end of a long day, a thank you, a moment of shared quiet in a noisy world. When the last note faded, the applause was warm and respectful. There were no cheers or whistles. It was a different kind of appreciation. She stood, gave a small, gracious nod, and walked back to her table. The host hugged her. Beautiful. Just beautiful. But the moment that mattered most came later. As the gala was ending, an older woman in an elegant silk suit approached her. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. That was lovely, dear, the woman said. But I've read about what you're doing in the schools. That's the real music, isn't it? Giving them the instruments to write their own songs. Yes, Elena said, her heart swelling. It really is. The woman smiled. My late husband loved music. I think he'd like his legacy to help buy a few more of those drums. She handed Elena a check, already written, with a number that made Elena's breath catch. It was enough for keyboards for 3 whole schools. Elena held the check, a thin piece of paper that felt heavier than any tray she'd ever carried. This was it. The full circle. The music from the piano had paid for the music in the classroom. Walking to the bus stop in the cool night air, her fancy dress hidden under her warm coat, she felt a profound sense of wholeness. The girl at the piano and the woman in the school were not 2 different people. They were the same person, stronger for having been both. The next morning, she was back at Fairview Elementary. The highway still roared. She unpacked a brand new gem drum from a fresh box. She gathered the kids in a circle. "Today," she said, her voice cutting through the background rumble, "we're going to be louder than the traffic. Who wants to start?" Every hand shot up, and Elena, smiling, began to teach them the rhythm of their own power.